start.
The time is 1:48. We are going back on the record. This is tape 3 of the videotape deposition of Bill Gates on September 2nd.
Mr. Gates, let me show you a document marked as Government Exhibit 390.
We go backwards.
The first message here purports to be a message to you and Mr. Moritz and Mr. Alchin on February 24, 1997 at 11:07 p.m. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it talks about a focus group report, and it says that most of the people in the focus group were Navigator users, and then it goes on to say about those Navigator users, quote, they said they would not switch, would not want to download IE4 to replace their Navigator browser. However, once everything is in the OS and right there, integrated into the OS, in their face, so to speak, then they said they would use it because there would be no more need to use something separate, close quote. You see that?
Yes.
Do you recall being told that in or about February 1997?
No.
Okay. Let me ask you to turn to the 5th page of this exhibit. And this is a original message dated February 24, 1997 at 10:38 a.m. Also relating to the Memphis focus groups report.
It's an enclosure to the message above.
It's an enclosure to the message above. That is, what you have is first a message dated February 24, 1997 at 11:07 p.m. that went to you, Mr. Moritz, and Mr. Alchin, and then you have another message that was an enclosure to the message that went to you and others, correct?
Yes.
So you would have received this second message when you received the message that was addressed to you, correct?
If I did, which I told you I don't remember, but I have no reason to doubt that I did.
Right. The next to last paragraph on the 5th page of the exhibit, the one that ends with the Microsoft Document Production stamp 8179. Do you have that page?
Yes.
The next to last paragraph of this material that was sent to you on February 24th, 1997, if in fact it was, on page 5 says, quote, it seems clear that it will be very hard to increase browser market share on the merits of IE4 alone. It will be more important to leverage the OS asset to make people use IE instead of Navigator. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were you told that in or about February of 1997?
Out of the context of this memo?
Well, first, let's ask, were you told that in the context of this memo?
Objection. Is your question, did he receive the memo?
Well, I don't know what he meant by his statement. He simply was asking me whether I was asking him whether he was told that outside the context of this memo. I want to know whether he was told it inside the context of the memo.
Objection.
Those sentences seem to appear in this memo that's talking about some features. It wasn't a product demo, but some features, including WebView, that they showed to some end users.
Let me try to break the question down. First, do you recall being told in any context, in or about February of 1997, quote, "It seems clear that it will be very hard to increase browser market share on the merits of IE4 alone. It will be more important to leverage the OS asset to make people use IE instead of Navigator"?
Those words?
Let me begin with that. Do you recall being
No.
communicated those words in or about February of 1997?
I said no.
Do you recall being communicated those words at any time, whether in or about February 1997 or any other time?
Isn't that what I just answered?
Perhaps you did. I thought the first answer related to February 1997, but if you're telling me you don't recall ever being told that, I just want that clarified for the record.
Those words? No.
Do you recall being told in substance what is stated here? At any time, in the language that I have just quoted?
Now that's a self-contradictory question. You can't say you're asking me something that's in substance and then say in the language you just quoted. That's completely contradictory.
Well, sir, if you don't understand the question or you can't answer it, all you have to do is say so.
Well, I understand that the question is contradictory to itself.
Well, Mr. Gates, the memo says...
There's no problem there. You just made a mistake on that question. It's okay. Why don't you just
Well,
state a new question?
Well, Mr. Heiner, I frankly think, well, I won't debate with the witness, I will debate with you.
Like this.
I think the question was actually quite clear. But what I was about to do was put a new question.
Okay.
This document that purports to have gone to you, sir, says, "It seems clear that it will be very hard to increase browser market share on the merits of IE4 alone. It will be more important to leverage the OS asset to make people use IE instead of Navigator." Do you recall ever being told or ever receiving a communication that said in substance what is reflected there?
No.
All right. Let me show you Exhibit 591, or I guess it's Exhibit 391. This purports to be a message to you dated April 18th, 1995, to you and other people. Did you receive this message in or about April of 1995?
I don't remember receiving it, but I have no reason to doubt that it was sent to me.
Let me ask you to look at the bottom of the first page, the next to last paragraph, the sentence that begins, quote, "This does not mean that Netscape needs to be a direct competitor." Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recall discussions in or about April of 1995 about whether or not Netscape would or would not be a direct competitor of Microsoft?
I'm sure there was some discussion about Netscape and the whole internet phenomena, and particularly what that meant about the business Nathan was in charge of, which was Marvel. I don't remember specifically if we figured out whether they would or wouldn't be a competitor or what they were doing.
Do you recall communications within Microsoft in or about April of 1995 about what might be done to be sure that Netscape did not become a direct competitor of Microsoft?
No.
Do you recall any communications within Microsoft in or about April of 1997 relating to what Microsoft might do to influence whether or not Netscape became a direct competitor of Microsoft?
No.
Do you recall any discussions within Microsoft at any time, or any communications within Microsoft at any time, relating to what Microsoft might do to influence whether Netscape became a direct competitor of Microsoft?
No.
Okay. Let me ask you to look next at an exhibit marked as Government Exhibit 392. The second item here purports to be a message from you to Paul Moritz and Brad Silverberg with copies to a number of other people, dated January 28, 1997 at 10:34 a.m. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you send this message to Mr. Moritz and Silverberg and the others on or about January 28, 1997?
I don't remember doing so, but I have no reason to doubt that I did.
You say that, quote, there has been, or at the beginning of this document, the very beginning of the document, you say, quote, there has recently been an exchange on email with people in the Office group about Office and HTML. In one piece of mail, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers, and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser. This is wrong, and I wanted to correct this, close quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you send that message to Mr. Moritz and Mr. Silverberg and others in or about January of 1997?
You already asked that, and I told you I don't remember sending it.
Did you convey the substance of what is here to Mr. Moritz and Mr. Silverberg in or about January of 1997.
I don't know the time frame, but there was a question for very advanced features in Office, had to deal with the fact that older browsers, including our own older browsers, couldn't display the information. And should we therefore display it to no one, or what should we do about advanced display semantics? And I know in that case, the issue came up about should we support the advanced display semantics at all?
Is it your testimony, Mr. Gates, that that's what you were talking about here?
Absolutely. That's what this message, I mean, if you read it, that's what it's about.
Now, this is a message that you don't recall sending, is that correct?
I've read it today, but I don't recall sending it. That's right.
But what you're doing is you're testifying under oath that when you say that you should force Office users to use Microsoft's browser, you were talking about what you just described? Is that your testimony?
I don't see that in the message.
Well, you're saying here that Microsoft should force Office users to use Microsoft's browser, are you not, sir?
No.
Well, sir, you say, quote, in one piece of mail, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser. This is wrong, and I wanted to correct this. Is it your testimony under oath that you were not saying that the assertion that you had heard that Microsoft shouldn't force Office users to use Microsoft's browser was wrong?
There's a sentence there that talks about whether Office has to work equally well with all browsers. And because I'm talking about Trident here, Trident was a set of technology we're doing to extend things so that you could work with Office documents that are very rich documents in a new way that no previous browser, including our own previous browsers, was willing to display. And there was a question of whether they should take advantage of those Trident things or not. Some people are questioning whether we should take advantage of those Trident things. And here, I'm making very clear, and all I have to do is read the complete email, I'm saying we should go ahead and take advantage of those Trident things. Now that's very different than saying that people are forced to use any browser. It's just if you want the best experience in terms of seeing those rich documents, what we were doing in Trident, I thought we should take advantage of.
Now, sir, is it your testimony sitting here under oath that when, in the language that I have quoted, you wrote, this is wrong and I wanted to correct this, relating to the previous sentence in which it said, in one piece of email, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser? You were talking about Trident? Is that your testimony?
Well, I think you've mischaracterized my testimony.
Okay. All I'm asking is whether that's your testimony. If you tell me that's not your testimony, we'll go on. Is that what you're telling me, sir?
Are you trying to characterize my previous testimony?
I was trying to see whether we understood your previous testimony.
Your characterization was wrong.
Okay. In the second paragraph of this exhibit, you write, in one piece of mail, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser. This is wrong, and I wanted to correct this. Does that statement relate to Trident, sir?
I explained how it relates to Trident.
So your answer is that that relates to Trident. Is that your testimony?
In order to know that, I read the entire piece of email, and upon reading it, I know that what that relates to is whether we should exploit the advanced features of Trident so that the Office works particularly well with the new browser from us with those Trident features.
Mr. Gates, isn't it clear that the discussion at the end of the memo about Trident is about a different point than the point that we've been talking about?
Absolutely not.
Well, sir, immediately after the paragraph we've been talking about, don't you write, another suggestion in this mail was that we can't make our own unilateral extensions to HTML. I was going to say this was wrong and correct this also. And then you go on to talk about Trident. Isn't that what you wrote here?
I think you've correctly read some of the words in the email. We could go on and read more of the words so that you could understand why what I've told you is correct.
Well, is there anything in here that asserts that forcing Office users to use Microsoft's browser is limited to the Trident situation?
It's clearly about whether Office should emit HTML that takes advantage of Trident and whether that's a good idea or not. That's what this piece of email is about.
Well, if that's all it's about, Mr. Gates, why do you introduce the Trident discussion by saying, another suggestion in this mail is that we can't make our own unilateral extensions to HTML. I was going to say this was wrong and correct this also. Aren't you clearly saying that this is an additional point?
No, you're just trying to misread my email. It talks about Office.
Yes, it certainly does talk about Office. And it talks about forcing Office users to use your browser. Correct, sir?
No.
It doesn't? When you say that somebody is saying that you've seen in email people saying that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser and that this is wrong, you're not saying that you should use Office to force users to use your browser? Is that what you're saying?
That was the most circular thing I've ever heard.
Okay, I think it was pretty circular because I think what was going on here is pretty
circular. You continue to not
circular.
read the sentence and look at the piece of email. The question in this email is whether Office should work equally well with all browsers.
Well, now, sir.
And it's talking about, if you want to look further to understand it,
how
it
about
says
letting
we
me put a
need to
question
have
to this?
tags.
Well, may I just ask the witness what question he's answering?
Whatever the last question is.
No,
that was
I want to
posed.
know whether he even knows what question he's answering.
You two had
Could you read back the question?
No. Can you tell me, Mr. Gates, what question you're purporting to answer?
Your last question.
Do you know what it is?
Could I make it as convoluted as you did? No.
Can you tell me what question you're answering?
I can't repeat back that convoluted a question. I
Can't-
could ask the reporter to.
Can you tell me the substance of the question you're answering?
Mr. Boyes, pose the next question.
Okay.
Let me suggest one. Ask him about the first sentence, which is the subject matter being introduced.
Okay. The first, actually, we've read the first sentence, but I'll read it again. The first sentence, which is one paragraph, says, there has recently been an exchange on email with people in the Office group about Office and HTML. Second paragraph says, in one piece of mail, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser. This is wrong, and I wanted to correct this. Third paragraph says, another suggestion in this mail was that we can't make our own unilateral extensions to HTML. I was going to say this was wrong and correct this also. Now, have I read correctly the first three paragraphs of this memo, Mr. Gates?
Yes.
And is it your testimony that when you said that the email suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that Microsoft shouldn't force Office users to use Microsoft's browser was wrong, that all you were talking about there was Trident? Is that your testimony?
I'm not sure what you mean, all I was talking about. This email is about the Office and HTML.
Yes.
There's a new extension to HTML being created in Trident. There was a question of whether Office could take advantage of it, which meant that it would take advantage of those new browsers in a better way than it would take advantage of our old browsers or other people's browsers without those extensions. I was suggesting here, and it's totally a mischaracterization to suggest that that third paragraph isn't totally in line with it, that we should take advantage of those Trident HTML extensions, and therefore Office documents would look better, at least for those users.
And is it your testimony? And all I'm trying to do is clarify your testimony, Mr. Gates, because once the testimony is done and down, the trier of fact can decide what credibility, if any, to give it. All I'm trying to do is identify it. And you have said that the extensions to HTML relate to Trident, correct?
Yes.
Now, what I'm trying to find out is whether these extensions to HTML that relate to Trident is also the only point of your statement that you should force Office users to use your browser.
That's a sentence fragment here. What people were saying was, if we took unique advantage of Trident, wouldn't people feel like they needed to upgrade to Trident? And I said, hey, if that's the only way they can see the advanced document capability, then fine.
Well, Mr. Gates, I mean, that's not what this email says. I mean, the
We
words
certainly
about...
know what the email says.
Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, and I don't mean to be disrespectful here, but aren't you doing what we talked about before here, just trying to substitute different words for the words that you actually wrote that you think will sound better in the context of this litigation?
I've explained to you what this email is about. You don't seem to like the facts.
Well, Mr. Gates, my question, and if the answer is yes or no, or I don't understand your question, you can give me that testimony. But is the explanation that you're giving me now of this document an explanation where you're trying to use words differently now because of the litigation than you used them back in 1997?
No,
Not at all, sir?
no.
Do you feel more uncomfortable admitting in a deposition in this case that you were trying to force Office users to use your browser than you did back in January of 1997?
You're mischaracterizing the email.
Well, let me ask you a question independent of the email. Do you feel more uncomfortable with the characterization that Microsoft is forcing Office users to use Microsoft's browser today than you did back in January 1997?
I've never been comfortable with lawyers mischaracterizing the truth.
Well, Mr. Gates, can I have my question answered?
I answered it.
Would you read the question back, please?
Do you feel more uncomfortable with the characterization that Microsoft is forcing Office users to use Microsoft's browser today than you did back in January 1997?
Could I have an answer to that question, sir?
Objection.
My view of lawyers mischaracterizing something has not changed.
Mr. Gates, I'm not talking about your view of lawyers mischaracterizing things. I'm talking about your view of the use of language. You've got a document in here in which you talk about forcing Office users to use our browser. You say, quote, "In one piece of mail, people were suggesting that Office had to work equally well with all browsers and that we shouldn't force Office users to use our browser." And you go on to say, "To top executives of your company, this is wrong." Now, my simple question is whether you're more concerned about the use of those words today than you were back in January of 1997. Whether this litigation is influencing the care and precision, if you want to put it your way, with which you are determined to use words.
I'm not sure what I'm comparing to what.
Okay, let me try to be clear. In January of 1997, you wrote this email
In total.
in total. And at the time you wrote this email, you didn't have any expectation that it was going to show up in this litigation, did you?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
What I mean is you thought this was a private email. You thought you were writing to your executives, and you didn't think anybody outside the company